I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by discussing the topic of war. Wars are usually started because of greed, and human greed can take several forms. Now, some people want to acquire more things like gold or precious crystals like diamonds or rubies, and I could go on, but I'm not going to. Okay? However, other people want to acquire more land without purchasing it. Think about all the land that was acquired by the Roman Empire, all due to war. Need I say more? As a matter of fact, God discussed the topic of property acquisition in the Old Testament. Just go back to the first 5 books of the Bible and you'll see it for yourself. There you go. Of course, there are other people who just simply want to oppress other people. Now, how do they do that? Well, one way they do that is with a warped interpretation of theology. Now, I'll say that again. A warped interpretation of theology. Think about Jim Jones or David Koresh. Need I say more? But other people will oppress people with violence. That's never a good thing. Okay, so let's go on here. God loved us so much that he included instructions in the Bible to guide mankind's moral compass. But when mankind refuses to allow the Bible's instructions to guide its moral compass, God can and sometimes does resort to violence to guide mankind's compass. A perfect example of this can be found in the Old Testament with the story of Moses. You remember the 10 plagues? Need I say more? So should Christians presume that God's second choice in guiding mankind's compass is violence? Absolutely not. God created governments and kings and military soldiers and police officers and even parents to guide mankind's moral compass in case they decide they don't want to read the Bible. Or maybe they are unable to read the Bible. That's why God has all those wonderful people to guide mankind's compass if they are unable or unwilling to read the Bible. But if all that fails, then God finally may have to resort to violence. As a matter of fact, to show you how non-violent God is, when Ananias and Sapphira lied about their tithing in the, well, it wasn't the Old Testament, it was the New Testament, it was actually the book of Acts, when they lied about their tithes, and Peter stood there and he warned them not to do it, and they did it anyway. Finally, God said, well, I'm just going to take your life. That's it. End of story. So, God does everything he can not to resort to violence. That's not God's way. But sometimes people just don't listen, and there you go. Okay? Now then. Alrighty. Now, many people today resist the use of corporal punishment due to violence. Well, we can't teach our kids violence. Well, there's a big difference between God's idea of corporal punishment and teaching kids violence. And I'll give you the difference, okay? When a parent swats their kid's behind one time with their hand, okay, they take their hand, they swat the kid's butt once, just one time. Well, that might leave a tiny welt which will heal within a few hours. Probably not even that long. That's the equivalent of, say, the kid trips over himself and he lands on the ground and he lands on his butt. Sure, it's painful, but there's no long-lasting effects. There's a humongous difference between that and an ancient tradition called caning. Think about that. Where they take this great big rod and they slam it across your back. Those two are not the same thing. I promise you. Now, what's the two problems with corporal punishment? One, it's used way too often. Two, it's not used correctly. The correct use of corporal punishment goes like this. You swat the kid once on the behind, and then you sit there and you explain to the kid what he's done wrong and why it's wrong. You see what I mean? So it's a two-stage method. You first tell them what they've done wrong, and then you tell them why it's wrong. Because you don't want kids to blindly follow rules. If they do that, they'll never get anything out of it. However, okay, if they understand why what they were doing was wrong, then they'll have a moral sense about themselves, and they'll yearn not to do it because they don't want to hurt their friends, they don't want to hurt their family, that kind of thing. See? The thing about corporal punishment is it needs to be phased out. Okay? You may have to use it while they're toddlers because they have an inability for speech. Okay? I don't know very many toddlers that you would not have a very good time effectively conveying your thoughts and ideas to them because they don't have the speech recognition to handle that. Okay? They grow into that eventually, but they don't start out that way. So you may have to use a little bit of corporal punishment to guide them along until they develop their speech capabilities. And then you could go into a more lengthy explaining to them what they're doing wrong rather than using corporal punishment. And like I said, corporal punishment should be used very sparingly. Okay? There are plenty of other methods of punishing a kid, and these are recorded in books all over the world. There are plenty of other ways to punish a kid without resorting to corporal punishment. That should be a last resort, not a first thing you should try. Okay? I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do it. I do support corporal punishment, but only to a point. You use it when you have to, and even if the kid doesn't completely understand you right off the bat, he'll figure it out eventually. You immediately follow the swat on the butt with discussing what the kid did wrong and why it was wrong. And then eventually he picks up on that and he learns it. Otherwise, he'll get the idea that he's being unfairly treated. And we don't want kids to think that, and we don't want kids to learn violence. That we don't want. Okay? So, the best example of the point where God does not want you to use corporal punishment on a prolonged use type thing. Now think about this. When God used the 10 plagues against Egypt, did he continue sending plagues to Egypt after Moses and the Israelites left? Of course not. He actually let that government rebuild itself. Maybe he shouldn't have, I don't know, but he did. He didn't send any more plagues to Egypt after Moses and the Israelites left. So, if God believes in not using a prolonged use of corporal punishment, so should we. One swat on the butt and a lengthy explanation, and only as the last resort. Talking is the most effective way of reforming children. Okay? So yes, I do believe in corporal punishment, but not on a regular basis. It should not be overused, and it should always be accompanied by a teaching lesson. So the kid understands and comprehends right from wrong and why things are right and wrong. See what I mean? Okay. Now, the last thing I'll discuss on here is people say, well, Jesus brought peace. No, Jesus did not bring peace. Okay? Jesus actually brought a sword. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what it means. Let's say we're back in first century Judea, and say you have a household full of people that believe in Roman pagan gods, and one member of that household decides, well, I'm not going to believe in those pagan gods anymore, I'm going to be a Christian now. Imagine what his life was like, or her life, either one, sitting in that house full of pagan gods and goddesses while they believe in Christianity. It wasn't the best situation. We have people today that believe in Buddhism. Let's say a member of that family decided, oh gee, I don't want to believe in Buddhism anymore, I want to believe in Christianity. What would be life like for that person? It'd be pretty miserable, don't you think? And I could go on and on with that. So before you think that Jesus just automatically brought peace, no. He said, I brought a sword that divides. What does a sword do? It divides. Christianity divides families. It divides communities. It divides nations. You don't believe that? Look at the United States today. See what I mean? And it's all usually because of greed. In one form or another, it all goes back to greed. Because like I said, greed takes many forms. And it's usually the catalyst for war. If you don't believe me, just go ahead and take a look at the conflicts of today. Much of it can be attributed to greed. If you look carefully, you'll see it for yourself. Alright, that's all I've got to say for this evening. I will tell you more in a future video, so I want you to stay tuned.